Hey everybody, welcome back for our second session. Okay, so in this session, this is actually where I start to get more into the, um, basically ways and hows and what to do in terms of like actually writing a news story. Okay, I begin to be honest with you. Just want to answer a few questions that were kind of lingering out there. So we do have reading assignments, and just so you know, I know this is probably like a weird concept, okay? But you're not being tested on the writing assignments. Let me repeat: you're not being tested on the writing assignments. Yes, I'd actually you do have reading assignments. I don't have a video camera in your house spying over you, or I don't have any kind of mechanism to check to see whether you're actually doing the reading assignments or not, okay? But it's actually kind of built on trust. This is what other writing for media profs are doing. Um, we're not actually, I mean, this is contradictory, but we're not actually like big fans of having to rely on the book. Okay. But we are required to actually to have the book and to have you read it. And, you know, the deal here is that we just have to read it. And then what it does is, again, it supplements what I talk about in class. And the only real way I can actually judge whether you're actually doing the reading or not is by the quality of your writing. Okay. Maybe I went over that a little bit too fast last week. As I told you, I had some mechanical or some technical difficulties last week, so I probably did go over things and glom over things a little too quickly. That's what the reading is for. So the reading assignments are there, and they're on the actual Canvas assignment list. Okay. As a matter of fact, let's go to that right now. Um, okay. So, okay. So here they are right here, the student view. And what I also do is I actually go over these in these asynchronous lectures. I go over essentially highlight like maybe important things to look at in these chapters. Okay. Again, to supplement what I talk about in the lecture sessions. Okay. And as you can see, now I'm going to be posting something. I'm actually recording this on Sunday. I'm going to be posting something on Monday. It'll be a new assignment, which I'll talk about later. But as of this is what we had due for Monday. Again, the profile story. It's an ungraded assignment. I've got about 9 of them already. That's great. It's about half the class. The third person profile of yourself. I'll talk about that. But then what's also due is chapters 1 and 2 of the book. Okay, so all right, so we'll talk about that in class. All right. Um, First of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about. Let's see here. Let's stop the share for a second. I wanted to talk a little bit about, um, you know, as a foundation for like how to write a story is basically a little bit about the this very first assignment I'm actually giving you guys, and that's again the profile on yourselves. And I'm sorry about the confusion before during the week. Okay, I meant to say that you write a third person voice story on yourself. Again, another weird concept. Okay, we do things weird in this class. We break conventions. What can I say? It works, I guess. It does. I've had many people turn out well. Um, so it's almost like you're interviewing yourself. Okay, and you're gonna write it, and basically the idea with third person. Now let me go to share screen again. Is that almost always in journalism you write in third person. Many times you don't. I mean that, and but we don't do that in this class. That's actually like a higher form of writing, opinion writing, critical writing, personal writing, where if you ever notice that like sometimes the whole concept of actually uh writing in the first person can like bore people because people don't like to read I, me, all this stuff. Me. It's actually, especially if like you're somebody who basically tries to show yourself that you did something really remarkable, but maybe you really didn't. I hate to put it that way, but for this assignment, we're not doing I and me. That's first person voice. You're not inserting yourself into the story as that way. Okay. what you're doing is you're doing he, she, it. And that way it's a first step, introductory step that I'm teaching you into how journalism works and news writing works. And that is that you are what they call a fly on the wall. Okay. You are a fly on the wall to your interview subjects or whatever news is going happening around you, or whether that's actually like some sort of a crime incident, a traffic accident, or maybe you're just doing an interview with somebody and you actually like act on a fly on the wall and basically keep a distance between yourself and your actually your writing. And that's actually objectivity. Okay. Is basically, basically writing about things in an objective way by keeping a distance between you and your subject. Okay. So he, she, it, okay, is what it is. And so far, what I've seen, everybody's gotten it. Everybody's everybody's gotten what the assignment is about. Again, it's not graded. Okay. So, so it's not like I'm testing you here. I'm just basically trying to, again, give you an idea like where I'm at in terms of like my instruction. And I'm also trying to get an idea where you're at in terms of your education so far on this. All right. Want to just show a couple of papers here. Now, this is a story where I think that actually things worked. Okay, well, and as I talked about before, my three main tenets in journalism, okay, are these three things. Okay. Yes, objectivity, obviously, maybe I could do a fourth, but that goes along with accuracy. Okay, just being right about things, but also just being right about things, but also at the same time, you can't really be like accurate on things if you're actually all the time, if you're actually just basically totally inserting yourself into a story that has nothing to do with you. Okay. You just can't. You have to basically keep your distance, and that way you can kind of like frame things in a way that like maybe shows both sides, tries to balance, because out of accuracy comes balance. Okay. There's a lot of things have been made about balance in journalism nowadays because, in the old days, especially in politics, Democrat, Republican, that was considered both sides. Now there's a lot of people, especially on the Democrat side, who basically feel, and not necessarily, I'm not going to try to get political here, okay, but some of the leadership in the Republican Party, people feel is actually kind of gone in another direction, and it's not necessarily like, in a way, I mean, if you look at like January 6th, what happened on the attack on the Capitol, that maybe it's gone beyond some sort of balance rationale, and that it's not necessarily a both sides issue anymore. But we do try to strike as much balance as possible by trying to show all sides, not just like a pro con, but different perspectives in a story. That's why, like, when you do a story, now the first story we're going to do, the first gray story we're going to do is going to be a single story called single source story. Okay. But actually, typically, what you try to do is you try to get more than one source in a story. Okay. And that provides balance. Again, it doesn't have to be like a pro con kind of thing, but basically try to be more than one perspective. Okay. Clarity. Okay. That's, again, as I said last week, where I can understand things from top to bottom. Okay. You're not going to get higher than a B if I don't really understand what the story is about. Okay. Um, basically almost like right off the bat. Okay. That's where you really have to like really kind of like hone in and zone in on what your angle is to the story. I'll talk about that in a sec. Okay. And you basically develop the story and you provide the details that are necessary so everybody understands what this story is about. Okay. And the one way to get there is to be focused. Okay, that's the third thing. Is to basically be focused from top to bottom. Okay, top to bottom on the story on the one particular topic. That could be a troublesome, especially when you're actually doing a story about a person who's got like a whole bunch of things going on, and you're like, oh my god, I want to leave these things out, blah blah blah. But you kind of have to, you know, you have to find that one thing that really just kind of sticks out above the rest, and it could be like something that maybe what I call an umbrella topic. It's like an overall topic about somebody, and they do all these wacky, crazy things. It's all part of the umbrella topic. Like, let's say the story is about somebody who's like a big world traveler, okay, and risk taker. So they travel the world and they do risky things. So you could talk about how in Australia they like bungee jumped. Um, in Europe, they the person I don't know, risky activity. Went down a waterfall, that was like 90-degree angle, something like that, where like all these different events were crazy and everything, but there's an umbrella topic that kind of brings them all together. Okay. One single focused topic. Okay. Basically focused on one single theme, an angle, as I call it. And that is that they're a world traveler risk taker. Okay. And you develop that from top to bottom. And the way to get there is by answering these questions: who, what, where, why, when. Okay. All right. And how. All right. To get there, you have to basically, especially if you're doing a profile on a person, you have to decide which of those, they call that essentially the W's. Okay. And which of those are basically are the like most important first. And you try to answer as many of them as possible in the first paragraph, which is called the lead. Okay. And that's actually how people spell lead in journalism. It's also like they spelled this way. Okay. But the lead paragraph, okay, the lead theme. All right. So what you do is you basically write a lead, which typically, like I said, is like the first paragraph. It tries to answer as many of those questions as possible, but focuses on the one specific thing that's most important. Okay. In this particular case, when you're writing a story about somebody, it's the who, okay, obviously is usually the most important. But I would say the two questions that need to be answered the most importantly in a story are the what and the why, okay? And what does that mean? So like in your first paragraph, you know, what is the story about? You want to answer that question, and why do I care? All right. Why do I care? And that's actually where the things like new and unique come into play, because those certain things are basically what separates this story from everybody else. What separates this person from everybody else? You try to answer those questions as much as possible in the first paragraph, and then the rest of the story essentially develops and builds on and provides details to try to help back up why that story is, why do I care, and what is the story about. Okay. Hope everybody can understand that. Let's look at a couple of the stories that we have right now. I actually like this story. Now, look, not every story has to be Queen Elizabeth has died. Okay, I'll talk about that today. But obviously, that's a huge story. I mean, no matter what you think of royalty, she served 70 years. You know, the monarchy is the system of government that actually doesn't necessarily, they call it, they say that it actually doesn't rule, but it reigns. Okay, so they do have some power, but not a lot. But they are viewed as like the person who leads the country essentially. Okay. And she served for 70 years, so that's a huge story. So I mean, that's the story, but it doesn't have to be necessarily on that level. Okay. I'm basically trying to show people that there are news stories that actually like matter if they're like something that maybe it's printed by my old publication Patch, the local publication, that sort of thing. So it's it's not necessarily, it has to be something that like groundbreaking, ground shaking, but it could maybe be serve as inspirational. It could be something that like there's a lot of stories that like, and you see this on social media too, where people are trying to like, they want to know what happened to somebody, um, after they left high school, and they want to know like what's that person doing or something. And maybe it's interesting to know Jonathan. I don't know Jonathan, if I mispronounced your name, I apologize. Salem. Lost physical activity in sports, specifically weightlifting and cardio exercise. So that's interesting to know. And I actually asked this question in my other class about people being active in college and everything. Not something that actually happens often. I ran cross country when I was in high school. I was very active. I still run to this day, but when I got to college, other priorities took shape. So it's actually not easy. I remember I asked the class, how many people in this class actually like you know would you say exercise on a regular basis, and 2 out of 20 people raise their hands. So it's not an easy thing to do. So this could serve as inspiration. It's actually somewhat unique for somebody in college, and it could attract a college audience. Okay. What I like what Jonathan did here is that he stayed focused on the topic. So he tried to answer as much as the who, what, where, why, when as possible. And like what I like about these kinds of stories is that for about college students, I like to hear the how do you do this with all the schoolwork you got to do kind of answers. He was always interested in sports, but lately has decided to dedicate himself to a more rigorous exercise routine while maintaining or trying to apply himself in school. Okay. This is something I'll be talking about, by the way, is that actually one thing, this is the way to actually source a news story, is to actually add he said or she said. That's called attribution. Okay. I'm not requiring it at this point, but just saying that that's actually, just in case you were wondering, there's no footnoting in news stories. You just write he said or she said or the person's name said. Okay. Because you basically have to give people an idea that this actually came from somewhere. It's not being made up. Okay. Um, Now this is actually like this is why we have the Associated Press style book. The last name is typically used on second and future references. So you would actually do Am Salem. Okay. Or he, but Am Salem is actually the way to do it. It's actually considered more objective. Also, the last name is actually also goes back to the whole newness, uniqueness thing. It's actually more unique than Jonathan. Okay, the name Jonathan. So this is how he does it. Basically, is how he gets it. Again, still staying. That was how we're staying focused on the same topic. Usually eats healthy and nutritious foods, attempts to get sufficient sleep, and avoids activities that can harm his health. So, yeah, this is how a college student stays in shape and actually maintains the stamina to continue to do so. Okay. Although training is very important to Am Salem, he understands that the school is priority, and so he trains in the evening. So we're getting into the how does he do it. This is so sometimes like questions can almost be repeated. How does he do it? How does he do it? Why does he do it? He strives to stay strong, keeping a rigid schedule. So maybe you don't answer all the who, what, where, why, when questions in this short story, but you answer as many as possible. And I'm seeing like, how does he do it? Why does he do it? And I'm seeing like, those questions answered. And who is he? You know, I'll probably say like where. That's actually an important one. We want to know if he's a Rutgers student. Because actually that's really important because Rutgers students are probably reading this and they might know the guy. They might relate to him. They might connect to him. Might want to know like where he actually does the training, that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, so that's basically um, a good focus story. Okay. I saw a lot of people like I saw some people they would like write about Jonathan M. Salem likes physical activity in sports, and then I would see something like this. Also works at I don't know. Is this still around? Frog in the Peach. See, that's going off topic when you suddenly go in some different direction. Okay. You want to basically like just basically that doesn't really have anything. If you're writing something that does anything to do with your main topic, then just stop. You want to stay focused on the main topic. And actually, there's a professor here at Rutgers in the journalism department who actually likes to call it the string theory. I'm going to use my electrical cord for this. I'm charging my computer right now. So anyway, he says basically you got to stay focused on top to bottom like a string. So you stay focused on the string. Because you ever notice that like when you pack one of these Apple cords, Mac cords, like maybe go away or something like that, and they get like tangled up and they're like really hard to kind of like get them back apart. So you want to try to avoid going all these different directions that tangles up your cord and then basically essentially tangles up your story. Okay. You want to stay on one straight path. Keep the cord untangled. Okay. When you're writing a story from top to bottom. Okay. All right. So that's what I'm looking for in terms of like a news story. Okay. Is something that basically stays from top to bottom, objective, third person, and tries to answer those who, what, where, how, why, when questions as much as possible. Okay. Let's see here. Going back to my whiteboard here. I call it a whiteboard. It's not really, but who, what, why was the story about? Okay. So how do you develop that topic? How do you basically find a topic that basically is something that's really like focus. Okay, so basically that's where the interviewing comes in. I'll talk more about interviewing as time goes along, but your next assignment is actually going to be dealing with that because you're going to actually have to interview somebody else this time. Okay, actually a real live interview. Okay. What you want to try to do is people ask me about how does an interview work, and I'll get more into depth of this as we go along. But basically the idea is that you have to basically, it's almost like it's not like, it's never like the most comfortable conversation. So if you're feeling uncomfortable in conversation when you're doing it in your first interview, don't feel bad, okay? Because that's what happens. It happens to everybody. It happens to reporters this day. You see it on TV, when they, especially when they do a controversial interview. Um, Basically, it's almost like more like a jot. The actual story itself is supposed to resemble a conversation. It's supposed to basically, that's why it kind of goes from paragraph to paragraph to paragraph, and like gives you like answers those questions: who, what, where, why, when. Like you're talking, having a conversation with somebody and trying to find out, like if it's a story about somebody, a profile, you're trying to find out like what's new with them. But with the actual interview itself for a news story does not resemble a conversation necessarily. It remembers more like a job interview where the questions are awkward and they're more like a list, but you're still trying to answer those who, what, where, why, when questions. And probably one of the first questions you want to know if you're doing a story about somebody is obviously what their name is. You want to know like where do they live, things like that. So you're going to get some of those basic questions out of the way. But as you're going through the interview process, that's when you have to use what I call reporter radar. Okay. And you have to almost kind of like get your beams on, basically kind of determine like, wait a minute, that's the thing that maybe is like the most interesting thing about him or her. Okay. And basically that's when you have to almost like kind of change direction from the general, or what I call the macro. Okay. And go to the micro and really kind of laser in your questions on that particular thing. And you know what, that may change too. You might actually, as you're going through the questioning of that particular topic, okay, you might find something even more interesting about the person. Okay. um that's why I say, like, you have to kind of like go in with first, like with an idea of what your story may be about. Okay. I actually encourage people in this very first grade assignment to actually um you know interview somebody they know, so they at least have that. And actually that's actually breaking journalistic conventions too, because other professors will tell you, no, 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 you gotta stay up, that's breaking cardinal rules, blah blah blah. But especially with this asynchronous situation, everything, it's not always easy for everybody to like maybe like have make contact with people or whatever. So especially like during this whole COVID situation, so I tell people like whenever your mother or father or whatever or a brother, sister, friend, whatever, that's fine. So at least you have some sort of an idea, like going in, like who this person's about, and that's like an overall idea. But then you want to like sharpen it to the angle. Okay, so you want to, like, when you get to that topic of the story, you want to try to think of the overall idea. Okay, Rutgers student trying to get through whatever, and then angle, what about that Rutgers student perhaps is like separates them from everybody else. Okay, and that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do. Actually, if we go back to the assignments, let's leave the student view for a sec, because actually I haven't posted, this is again Sunday. I will be posting this on Monday. I'm going to ask you to actually interview and profile somebody you know. Okay. So this actually, like I said, this will be posted on Monday morning by I say 9 or 10 o'clock, right? So assignment instructions: please interview somebody you know, can be a family member. Okay. Please keep the 500 to 800 words and focus on what's unique about the person and what's new. Please refer to the video lecture, this one, and the reading assignments for guidance. So that's the reading assignments do. They provide guidance. Please write in a news story format that should follow the basic outline. Now, this is now what I'm going to give you guys this semester, essentially like kind of different, actually more of a macro outline, going to that again, and then more of a micro outline for a news story. First, we're going to talk about the macro, okay? But then as maybe next week or the following week, I'm going to give you like more of a micro, basically what specifically should go in terms of a news story. Because again, a news story follows kind of more of a formulaic format, okay? And I mean, you want to try to be as creative as possible. I don't want to try to squash people's creativity, but a news story is really more about trying to get people to like get the news first. And I may have said this last week already, but um, again, a question that you might, if you go into this field, you might be asked is like, are you a better reporter than writer? The right question probably is actually reporter. I know lots of people who probably couldn't really, I'd be honest with you, couldn't write their way out of a paper bag when they were in college, and now they're successful reporters, and they still aren't that great writers, but they have a knack for like actually getting information that other people can't. I mean, it certainly helps to be a great writer too. That don't get me wrong, and sure make sure to try to develop that too, certainly. But getting the information is what's important. Answering those questions: who, what, where, why, when. Okay. So I provide this kind of macro outline here. Basically, what is this story about? Why do we care? In the lead, the first paragraph. Okay. And then the next paragraph, similar to what we just did, one or two sentences. What is the story about? More depth and details. Maybe another paragraph, one or two sentences, the same thing. And then we get into more like, why is this person unique? Why is it unique? How is it unique? How is it accomplishable? Like just trying to answer and try to keep things as unique as possible. Okay. And again, this one is not going to be 5 paragraphs long. This one will be more the length. This will be like the length of what we're going to have for a typical story. And that's 500, 800 words. Okay. So that's actually like, if you want to like really get kind of raw here, basically, that's a Microsoft Word doc. And by the way, I meant to say, like, I need all my stories on Microsoft Word. Okay. Please don't. I had a couple people submit PDFs. I can't create a PDF. Okay. Please do Microsoft Word. Okay. If you send it as a PDF and I send it back to you as a Microsoft Word, a markup and everything, then that should tell you right there that it's not, right. Okay. So please send your stories as Microsoft Word. All right. And then I provide an example of a story that works, actually. This is actually from a previous semester. Let's see here. Okay, this is from a student by the name of Morgan. Okay, so Joaquin Mati, a freshman at Rutgers University. So that provides a little bit of the where right there, who and the where, like who is this person? Okay. Missy became the first Rutgers student to represent X-Fit boxing company, similar to the other story, right? In his very own first public fight. Okay, so that's actually pretty unusual to have somebody who's actually a Rutgers student actually does boxing of some sort. Or actually, I think this is actually the what they call MMA. He didn't win, but they basically changed his life by providing him a new outlook in boxing. That's one thing to keep in mind, by the way, when you do this story, is that when you talk about somebody who's unique and what makes them unique, a lot of people kind of fall into the trap of writing about things that may have happened like 5, 10 years ago. Okay, but this is about what's new and unique, and that's fine. You can write about what happened to them 5, 10 years ago, but what I want to know about is like, where are they now? Okay, if it's something that's like nearly tragic, I've had people write about car crashes and that sort of thing. But I mean, are they still alive? Are they still functional? Are they still? I mean, you can write about that and write about how like maybe that like was a big moment in their lives and changed their lives and changed their worse for the better or whatever. But I want to know about what's happening now. Did they recover? Are they, like I said, are they going to Rutgers? Are they like they look back on that as like a changing point, a turning point in their life? You got to write about what's happening now. Okay. So, actually, let's go to the board for that. So, Fred Brown almost drowned in a, I mean, it's actually really gruesome. I'm sorry, but drowned in a pool in 2010. Okay. But, what happens in the last 12 years? Okay. Brown, so maybe you want to like get into your second paragraph or maybe like combine it wherever it says Brown looks back at that day as something that changed him. He needed to learn how to swim. Maybe it's something that actually made him like a champion swimmer or something, So something like that. You need to basically kind of update it so that we write about now, not just what happened like 12 years ago. Okay. In this particular case, I mean, his public fight was interesting and it was fairly recent and everything, but actually we also had to write about what was going on next. So she stuck with that. Like, okay, so what happened? What's next? Who, what, where, why, when. Okay. Didn't win. It was a lesson in experience. Losses will teach me what I did wrong so that I can take that as a win. Okay. So basically gave him like a bit of a teaching lesson. Okay. And then he continues to do the training and that sort of thing. There's somebody again who's a Rutgers student who's actually staying in shape. I provided this example with a link in the actual first assignment profile fall 22 2022 profile of somebody you know. Okay. All right. So that will be your first assignment. Like I said, that'll be posted on Monday. Um, I mean, all news stories, no matter like how big they are, how small they are. I mean, they follow like kind of the same format. This was the big story this past week. Queen Elizabeth II dies at 96, was Britain's longest reigning monarch. I mean, they have a long first paragraph, or otherwise known as a lead. That's actually two sentences. Typical obituary will do this. They'll actually will write basically who the person is, what they did, and then they'll write the age. Okay. But basically, it still is very simplistic in its ways it addresses people. It doesn't have some sort of lead in and kind of goes on about something maybe like Queen Elizabeth did like 10 years ago or something like that or whatever. It basically identifies you and tells you right away what you need to know, like a tweet. Okay, it's almost like I said, it's almost like an upside down mystery story where the mystery is actually revealed in the first paragraph. Okay, Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest serving monarch, whose broadly popular 7-decade reign survived tectonic shifts in her country's post-imperial society and weathered successful challenges posed by the romantic choices. Boy, they're really getting wordy here. Missteps and I can't pronounce that word of her descendants, like from the TV show The Crown, died on Thursday at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, her summer retreat. Okay, well, they're trying. I mean, it's a bit long, but they're trying to really like proclaim what's really unique about this. I mean, one of the most unique things, obviously, is that she served for 70 years. My God, before I was even born, 15 years before I was born, she came into power. And then like, how it was announced. Then what happens next? Charles becomes providing more significance to this. Charles becomes the king. And then they put in graphics and everything, basically showing the ascension. Good thing that, what's his name? His brother's not on the line of succession right away. He's a creep. But anyway, basically like what happened. They didn't talk about like how she died. I mean, she was 96, but how did she die? Basically, they talked about, they got as close to what I call as close to the truth as possible. Again, I said this last week. Bob Woodward, the famous Watergate journalist, talked about the importance of trying to get as close to the truth as possible. Okay, because you can't always be in the room to find out what happens. That's for sure. Most of the time, you're not. So basically, they say like that she had been in declining health essentially just in the last couple of days. She seemed to kind of go south, and then we actually had an announcement earlier in the day that like all the different people in her family were coming to see her at the castle. So it's all very basic, all very much like, again, the who, what, where, why, when. Okay. um More about like what led up to her death. She met with the new prime minister but couldn't do it at the normal spot, which was Buckingham Palace. Okay. All right. And again, like if you want to look at like again an example of like a place that has actually like leads like that, I mean, you don't want to look necessarily like, but some look backs. I know this has been a long time ago. Queen Elizabeth II paid tribute to 9/11 victims. I'm actually recording this on 9/11. But actually the news today essentially was Queen Elizabeth II's flag draped coffin is passing through the Scottish countryside and along on a final journey from her beloved summer estate, Balmoral Castle, London. So that's the news today. And as you say, that reads almost like a first paragraph to a news story. Okay. We're looking for like good, ideas of like an angle. So what's the latest angle in Queen Elizabeth's death? Is that she's being transported in her coffin, I guess, for the funeral and then also for the burial. Okay. Okay. So let's look at like again these first two chapters. Okay. Which is on this again. It's on this site called Chegg. I guess not typically on Kindle, but basically it provides some kind of like general basics. I kind of try to like glom over some of these early chapters. Not so much like really go into detail, but they talk about like obviously the interrelationship between technology and journalism, which is something actually I really discuss a lot more in my class, digital reporting. Okay. But it also provides a bit of the history of news business and how we actually got here. Okay. I may have actually, I have a tendency to repeat things and everything, but there's a reason why news is simplistic as it is. Okay. And it talks about the evolution of the news business. And it's largely because of, basically how things became more digital. And digital doesn't necessarily mean internet, but even just something that can be broadcast over the airwaves, like radio, that sort of thing. And I always bring people to, if you go to the modules, again, the modules kind of provide some sort of a guidance for like what we're going through in class each week, the writing basics. See chapter 2, September 12th. I provide an example of the Titanic story, which, to be honest with you, is like probably one of the wordiest, most ridiculous stories ever written. But I hate to say it that way because of obviously the content, people perishing and everything. And I'm guessing that's probably because of probably a lot of this stuff came over Morse code, and they felt kind of maybe like a sense of immediacy or something that they needed to get this out as quickly as possible. But you read this lead and it basically, you don't even get an idea like what was going on here. A lot of the newspapers at the time were writing for the elite. Okay, they were not writing. I mean, a lot of people didn't even know how to read. So and you're trying to write now for like people on a fourth grade level, as they say. I always ask people when I've had in-person class, I always say, like, how many people had a current event project when you're in fourth grade? Everybody raises their hand. And that's the idea, is that you're supposed to have some sort of an idea, even when you're like that young, that you should be able to read the newspaper and find out what's going on. And I mean, that doesn't mean that it's like dumbed down or anything like that, but basically gives you an idea. It's supposed to be writing for everybody. Okay. But the way this is written, it's not written for everybody. And again, it's probably not just like maybe like it's just not just like the Morse code interpretation perhaps, but it's also just like the wording. The White Star Liner Olympic reports by wireless this evening that the Cunard or Carpathia, I can't remember pronounce some of these words, reached at daybreak this morning the position from which the wireless calls for help were sent out last night by a Titanic Archer after a collision with an iceberg. The Carpathia, I mean, it's like, it doesn't even tell you what happened. It just says it right here. It foundered at about 2:20 a.m. So it sunk. I mean, Titanic sunk. Shouldn't that be like basically like the first words you should see? I know you might even be asking yourself like, well, isn't that like something they probably read in the headline or something like that? Well, yeah, but people kind of tend to skip over headlines and they want to kind of like, see it again for real. Like, is that really what happened and why and how and that sort of thing? And really kind of like, show the magnitude of what happened, and it's just written in all this gobbledygook. Foundered. Why would you use that word in latitude? I mean, who, I mean, it's near Iceland, right? Why would you like tell people people got to pull out a globe to try to figure out where this is, I guess, this is about 30 minutes of latitude or 34 in the south position of the iceberg. All boats are accounted for, and 6:55, blah, blah, blah. Souls have been saved. And then it tells you probably like many, many perished, 2,100 persons aboard were aboard the Titanic. Okay. And it just goes on and on like that. Okay. I mean, so what happened was basically like radio and TV happened and it changed the news business. And something decided that like, even though people back then were reading newspapers the day after, they still wanted some sort of sense of immediacy and simplicity in their writing. Okay. And the advantage that the newspapers and now the news sites have over the TV and that sort of thing is that they can provide the kind of depth. They can provide the immediacy and the simplicity that the TV and the radio are doing, and now the internet, but they also can provide the depth that the others couldn't. Okay. So when TV came in, I mean, actually, and what I usually typically do is actually show how Martin Luther King's assassination was broadcast. So let's see here. Sorry, I didn't have this up already. Walter Cronkite was the big anchor person at the time. He was the one who announced, one of the people who announced that this death happened.
No fees or minimums and no overdraft fees are another reason banking with Capital One is an even easier decision than this. We need a clutch hit. Derek.
Well, entertainment here.
Okay. Hang in there, rookie. Yep, even easier than that. What's in your
one? All right.
Direct from our newsroom in Washington.
Right to him announcing the tragic news. Okay.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street.
It gets into really some details, but it's basically right off the bat, Martin Luther King was assassinated and died. It's horrible, but you got to let people know. You got to tell them this tragic news. It's huge news. It's terrible news. One of the most important people, probably in American history, maybe world history, dies. So much can change because of that. And then it describes how it happened. And then, of course, there's the details that it was actually a white person, apparently a white racist who did it, and on and on and on. There's just those sharp details. You notice that there's the pausing and the halting that's coming after like each paragraph. It's like a sentence or two long. And that's to give the reader time to catch up, really, like time to really kind of ingest the details of what's happening. Because if I was actually watching this for the first time, I'd be still stuck on that first sentence. I'd be like, oh my God, it's horrible. So what he's doing is actually describing the scene. I've actually been at the site. I've seen the setup. I've seen the hotel room where he was at and that sort of thing, and the ledge, and that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to describe how this happened, the who, what, where, how, why, when. Okay. That's essentially like when, and like I said, that's when news actually suddenly said, okay, well, we got to like catch up here. And we had, it wasn't just that event, but it was just, this is the way television came in, and that time was in the radio, and they were reporting news more directly. So what I do is, I hate how to describe they use the word man, but this is many years after the Titanic. Men walk on moon. I know. Queen Elizabeth dies. Same process here. They should have said humans or people, okay? But men have landed and walked on the moon. Do you really need to say anything else? Really. It never happened before, so far as we know. You gotta like just basically say what the news is, right? Men have landed and walked on the moon. Thank you. I tell people that like adjectives can be like the bedeviling, like really like the journalist's downfall, because they get like to be so. That's, you could say that for the Virginia Woolfs and the classes, the English thing, journalism major. I'm not putting that down, but this is what the right people. And then basically it shows you like how it happened. They steered safely onto the fragile. So fragile. That's an adjective that you can use because it was a fragile. You can use adjectives that are factual. If you said beautiful, that's subjective, but it's fragile because it was fragile. They had some issues with it. Smoothly and landed on the surface. Neil Armstrong basically came out and said this, what happened, more about what happened, that sort of thing. Okay. So when they started actually moving in that direction, it basically not only helped newspapers connect with people, it helped newspapers survive, to be honest with you. So, all right. So that's the deal. So that's why we have the simplicity we have, is to basically try to be as connective and as accessible to people as possible. Okay. All right. More about chapters 1 and 2 here. Yes, basically they describe like some of the things that actually you should take into consideration when you actually develop your story. Obviously, even though it's simplistic and it's like there's not a lot, in terms of like, again, the writing style, there can be actually, don't rule that out. Okay. But I'm just saying that it's more about the facts than the style, substance over style. But there is like a storytelling to it. And that is, sometimes, I like to say that stories can just like basically write themselves, and especially if you have a crime story, like there's so many developments that happen like one step after another, like what led up to this horrible incident, or whatever. And it's almost to be written for you. Okay. Your job is to take it from the people who usually provide that information, which typically is like the police, and like provide and present that in a way that's actually some sort of a narrative, some sort of like a story, And again, we're revealing the most important information at the top. What happened with the crash? People die, people get injured, and then later on maybe identify like the impact traffic, that sort of thing. Critical thinking goes with objectivity. Again, the whole idea here is that you want to be somebody who's like a fly on the wall, and you want to basically be able to look at things from like, they call it like looking from things, not just a fly on the wall, but maybe even farther up. How editors will often ask their reporters, how does this look from 10,000 feet up? Okay, so that's actually another thing to take consideration, is basically like, how can I look at this and put myself in a position where I can look at this? Critical is not a bad word. It's critical meaning basically critique, not criticize, critique. Basically look at this from a point of view where I'm not involved, and I can like write this in a way that where my readers can trust me and understand me. Okay. Numeracy, I mean, they talk about the importance of numbers. I'll be talking about that. I actually give out my second assignment, second graded assignment I typically give out, not this one, is actually not a story. It's actually typically I give out a worksheet thing where we really kind of harp on like leads and trying to develop angles of stories and stuff like that. And numbers are like really important because they're probably the most best way to identify like, stories and the angles of stories. If there's a car crash, you want to know how many people are hurt, okay, or whatever. If there's a story about, and I'm kind of giving away a hint for the future here, rise in murders in a particular area, you want to know like, okay, what's that increase? Is if it's like 50%, that's pretty high. Although you do have to be objective about that. 50% could mean like 2 to 3, okay? But if it's an increase from 50 to 75, that's significant, okay? So stuff like that, numbers matter, okay? Dollars, old journalism adage, going back to what I said about Bob Woodward, and again was the one of the two main reporters on the Watergate story that brought down President Richard Nixon in 1974. Watergate happened in 1972. The guy who was like the main source for Woodward on that story was this guy, they called him Deep Throat. His name, and I have to admit it kind of escapes me, was actually revealed about 30 years later or 40 years later. But anyway, his big thing was follow the money. And that's how they got to the root of the story, was able to find out who was passing around money and who was taking it, who was getting paid off. Okay. Technology, obviously there's important things. I mean, we don't get so much into the technology into things of this class, but technology are now part of the package, audio visuals, videos, things like that. Those are important parts. Again, we don't really do that in this class. It's more for digital media. Civics, that's actually something I try to like integrate into writing for media as much as possible, but I haven't really been able to do that as much lately. I have had people in the past actually cover a meeting, but I don't do that with the asynchronous class. I mean like a council meeting, because I feel like, you're probably taking this class because it's probably easier for you. It's probably like a situation, maybe you don't want to be around groups, people, that sort of thing. Maybe, it's a little difficult for you to get out. So I don't like make it and I don't have people actually like do assignments where that require you to like travel to some place, some meeting place. It's like totally contradictory to what we're doing here, which is me talking to you in a video and like be around other people and that sort of thing. I mean, I want you to interview people for stories, yes, and be around people for that, but cultural events, things like that. I mean, like obviously that's something to take consideration, but things like, genders, ages, races, religions, things like Roe versus Wade, changes the culture of society. We're going to see what happens with that. Those are things that we try to look for in terms of like stories, mission and purpose. Okay, so basically, I always tell people that it's important to like be objective in the story, but it's also good to have passion. And we're not robots, okay? We're like, it's not like we just kind of walk through life and we're unfeeling and we don't, we can't like care about something. I mean, like you can, and that's why you're right about these things. You just try to stay as objective as possible. But obviously, if something really bad happens, you just have to write about it, but you can't really necessarily inject your opinion about it. But the way to get I call it your passion. The way to get your passion projected through is to write a good story, a good balanced story, and get the important details so people will know. That's your job essentially. It's not necessarily to tell people what's going on, but to show people. I call it the show and tell difference. Show people what's going on, okay? Present it to people and let them make up their minds for themselves. And it's so obviously bad what happened. All you got to do is show them the details. You don't have to insert your opinion to do that. People almost get insulted when you do that, okay? You want people to like think for themselves and read for themselves and let themselves be enriched. Like I said, journalism doesn't necessarily have like a literary style to it, even though it is literature, okay? But it does have a style, and actually that's why we have the AP style book, okay? Because basically that's what helps people. I hate to put it this way, but journalism style is actually like a lot like what do you would call, I guess, like there's like a certain sameness, beauty of the sameness of it and the simplicity of it, okay? And that is that you want to present it in a language that everybody from all walks of life can understand, all states of the United States, all countries of the world. I mean, obviously we can't always publish in different editions and languages, that sort of thing, but there's a certain sameness to it in a style, like I hate to say it, but like McDonald's, where like you basically like want to be able to eat the same damn thing that you eat in North Dakota that you ate in New York City or even in Ireland or whatever. Okay, I say that because I went to a McDonald's in Ireland, so it was the same as in McDonald's and I went to a Kentucky Fried Chicken and a KFC in England one time. But anyway, so so they have an Associated Press style book, which actually kind of is like almost like an extension of the dictionary, and it helps you identify things that like, okay, what should I do here? Should I, on the second reference, do I use the last name? Big one they use, okay, give you two main examples is, how do I abbreviate somebody's title before a name, especially like police officers? If you interview a police officer and he or she goes by sergeant, okay, so is it, or they? And the AP style book will tell you actually before you put in that person's name, you should put SGT period. So basically it helps you identify certain terms and how they should be used, okay? Like that, okay, captain. All right, that sort of thing. Another thing they do is they identify things like they actually, the postal code will tell you like how, I believe this is Alaska. That's the postal code for Alaska, okay? But actually the AP style book says that most people don't read like in postal codes when they want to look for an abbreviation of a state. And actually Alaska doesn't get abbreviated in AP style, it actually gets spelled out, okay? So stuff like that, okay? Texas gets spelled out. New Jersey, this is the postal code for New Jersey, but for AP style book, it's 2 periods, okay? New York's the same way. Alabama is this way in Associated Press style book, okay? Numbers is a big thing. You want to make sure that you have the numbers correct. And now I used to give quizzes on this, okay? But then I decided, that's just like a waste of time. I want people to learn how to write better. So what I do is I actually check for these things in your stories. So it becomes part of your story grade, is making sure that you are reading the AP style book. And when I say read it, really just kind of scanning through it and looking up things and making sure you have things abbreviated correctly, okay? I would say try to scan it as much as possible, okay? Look for the most important things like state names. And actually what I do is, and I'll show you in a second, I actually give kind of like an abbreviated version of the style book. You may not even need to purchase a style book if you read this thing, but I'll show you in a sec. But basically numbers, typically 1 through 9 are spelled out. Okay. The only time they're not, well, one of the few times they're not is when it begins a sentence. Okay. And it's actually spelled out. I'm sorry, numbers above 9 are spelled out. Even like 1,346,000, that's actually like starting a sentence, it actually gets spelled out. Yes, believe it or not. Okay. Also, like if you're doing a percentage, like 9%, this changed, by the way. Yeah, actually it becomes a number. If you're doing like identifier like that, like a percentage, it gets a percent. This actually, AP style used to be this. This just changed in recent years. Now it's this. So there's things like this that have changed. Okay, and I do like I give, like I said, a kind of a cheat sheet on that. In the modules here, if you like, if this move down a little bit, where do I have it exactly? I have it right here. I'm sorry, under November, that's next week, September 19th, EP style basics. I actually have like my AP style cheat sheet right here. Okay. So you can look at this too, and maybe this will be helpful. Okay. All right. Abbreviations, ages. Age, that's another one, and actually gets a number and doesn't ever get spelled out. Stuff like that. Names, stuff like that. Okay. Punctuation, that's a big one. Okay. State abbreviations. There you go. Do they show the postal code, but how it comes in AP style? But the postal code's an abbreviation, but this is how it's abbreviated in AP style. Okay. So stuff like that. So that basically you'll find that under that module, okay, which was the AP style module. Okay. All right. Let's go back to the book. I don't want to spend too long because I know that these videos could go on forever, it seems like. All right. So, basically, like, it provides some of the things. One thing we're going to do in this class, just so you know, we're not going to write headlines. Headlines, that's something actually, that's a whole nother, that's a different writing craft in a way. And it's weird. I'll just tell you that. I like to kind of like really cut to the chase. It's weird. Okay. I mean, it's written typically in present tense and the whole thing. We write in past tense in news stories. A lot of people just tend, when they write stories in my classes, they tend to like just out of habit put a title on it or a headline. You don't have to do that in this class, okay? I'm not going to be looking at the title or the headline. I just want to like know what your lead is, okay? So basically, we're going to worry about that, the lead. Don't worry about the slug and things like that. Copy editing, news stories are actually called copy, okay? And in this class, you're going to be like a self-editor, okay? Something I talk about again in digital writing. Because so many times now, actually, so many what they call copy editors, people actually read your stories and edit them, will actually a lot of them, those have been cut because a lot of the business people feel like, oh, we don't need those, blah blah blah. The reporter could do it themselves, and it's true. Actually, now you're expected to actually really do a better job of editing yourself, okay? So you have to really, I always tell people that they're really reporters the first time they put things down on paper or on screen, okay? But then after that, it's a good idea, maybe like if you have the time to go back to it. That's why I give everybody a week to do things typically. Go back to it and then like write, basically like be an editor. You're almost like an editor. You take what you have written down, you basically edit it into something that actually is manageable and readable and understandable, as I said before. Okay. This is chapter 2, which by the way is called, it's like they were reporting the news. So how do we basically find the news? One of the things we obviously look for is timeliness. Okay. We want to know like things like, Queen Elizabeth has died, but what's the latest since then? As I described to you guys before, okay, so we had somebody who actually fought in a match, I guess an MMA match, but what's happened since then? So you want to basically try to get as up to date as possible. Okay. There's probably, that's actually a lot of stories that are done now, or a lot of even local papers, they'll do something that'll be like connected to like world events. And even though no matter what you think about royalty, that's considered a huge world event. So again, I'm actually doing this on 9/11. So there's a lot of remembrances today. So that even though it happened 21 years ago, this was such a big event, probably the biggest event in United States history. So basically, you might be writing stories essentially like, what's the latest with that? Well, they're doing this memorial service today. That's the timeliness, that sort of thing. Okay. Impact or magnitude. One big thing I talked about dollars and cents before. Does it affect my wallet? Does it affect my traffic? Does it affect my drive to work? I know a lot of people actually like work from home now. So, but whatever. Okay. Things like that. How does it personally impact people? Okay. Prominence, obviously like, that's the thing about, it's horrible to do this, but like, when you write obituaries, a lot of times when you write stories about people who died and things, it's horrible. But a lot of times the first name is left out of the story unless it's an obituary, because maybe that person isn't prominent. It's awful to say that, but if it's Queen Elizabeth dying, then that name gets mentioned. So you look for stories where the so-called prominent people are actually like, pass away or get hurt or something like that, and it becomes a news story. Okay. But it's not just that. Maybe it's something that, again, prominence, something that like is something that impacts like a wide area, like a 9/11 or something like that, or not even just that, but maybe like a blackout in an area that has like that obviously is something that has prominence because it has something that's large. Okay. Proximity, we obviously care about things that happen near us, around us. It's like going back to the traffic issues, you know. You want to know, I mean, especially if something happens to somebody, you might know that person. So you want to know what's going on around you. Okay. That's why like the local reporting becomes so important nowadays. You want to know like what's happening again with your taxes, that sort of thing. Unusualness, that goes with like, you know, what I was saying before about uniqueness. Um, you know, basically like the whole idea of like writing about like what separates this from everything else. Now conflict. Now this goes to the, you know, if it's bad news is good news thing. I mean, a lot of people will say like, well, why is the news always report about bad news? Well, it doesn't always. I mean, I just showed you the person landing on the moon, right? So, but you know, the fact of the matter is that like when something bad happens, it usually tends to have goes back to impact, more of an impact on people than necessarily when something good happens. Something good happens all the time, but people just kind of like want their lives to kind of continue in like a routine, and it's almost like they don't want to really even think about it. They just want to kind of keep things going. When something bad happens, that actually changes that routine typically. You know, so more than typically there's something good, I have to say. So that's why like we write about those things that happen that may be bad, and then also things that come into conflict because it may lead to some sort of change or something. Okay, and conflict can also be good too. Okay, could be like a protest, could be something that actually again could change the way people believe or think or do things. Okay. Um, all right, you know, more of this chapter is actually kind of again some of the same things I talked about. There's different types of news: soft news, breaking news. You know, what we're writing about essentially, this is more about what we're just talking about. You know, we're going to be writing more in like a hard news format. Okay, even though a profile of somebody actually could be considered hard news, and typically we'd be doing that, but basically we're going to be writing that in a way that like, you know, almost like you want to almost like announce to people what this person's doing, and that could be important or significant. Okay, and so it's we try to write in like that sort of hard news format where the hard news again is where the idea and what the story is about and why do I care is basically announced essentially like in the first paragraph. Okay. It goes into the who, what, where, why, when, where we try to answer those questions in this chapter. Okay. Yes, obviously some of the things we try to stray away from. I actually like stopped showing it because it was I thought there was probably maybe unnecessary gruesome details of that of the Martin Luther King's assassination, but maybe that was important because we wanted to show the magnitude of what happened. But basically, they talked. He was going into some details, which I actually was a little shocked by. Sometimes like we try to avoid like the really gruesome details of like especially things that happen in like car accidents and things like that because it's more about sensationalizing more sometimes. I'm not saying MLK assassination was that way, but sometimes like you know you see some of these tabloids and everything. We'll get into that area, and it's just like, okay, we really you know didn't need to go there. We really just need to know what happened and why. Okay. Obviously, we don't print rumors. We try to substantiate things, which is why attribution is so important to show that it came from somewhere. Okay. There's certain places we won't really deal so much with this, but like sexual assault, names of juveniles, where news outlets will have like, you know, they will have like essentially rules about that because you know they feel like a person who has actually been raped or something. Obviously, they don't want their name to be in there because there's sort of stigma attached to that. You know, and you know you just don't really want, especially on the internet, you don't want that name floating out there. And a juvenile, the idea is that like that's why there's juvenile. The juvenile records get wiped out typically before a person becomes an adult because you know you feel like the person's a kid and maybe they have I'm not taking a side here, okay, but maybe they have an opportunity to kind of like you know clean up their record and you know that this happened when they were a kid and like now they've grown to mature and this sort of thing. So that's kind of the idea behind that. Okay. um Obviously this is reemphasizing the importance with accuracy, and I get more into that as we go along. Okay. Obviously accuracy in names is very important. You want to make sure that, and again we avoid these, you want to make sure that you avoid the situation where um, you get things wrong. Okay. And it doesn't really have so much to do with um, I had it up here and now I don't. It doesn't have so much to do with just give me a second here, with you know a person basically, like a lot of people get afraid that they're going to libel somebody or something like that, and they bring out they're going to be sued and that sort of thing. Actually, it's really hard to sue somebody if you make a mistake, and you don't want to make mistakes to stories. You don't, but people are human and it happens. Okay, but you just don't want to be careless or reckless at the same time. Okay, and it's not so much about like ending up in a court of law, but basically trust and credibility. Okay. You want to basically build up that trust and credibility, and it goes to being objective. Okay, you want to be able to be a situation where people can rely on you and trust on you and know that you're providing the right information, the correct information. Okay, so so that's basically where you want to like really like make sure that you have like that trust and credibility, so people don't actually like feel like they can't trust you or they can't rely on you to provide the facts. Okay, and that's like things like I always tell people like you want to make sure that names are like spelled correctly. So a name like that's a coincidence that I'm using that name, but a name like Chris Brown. Okay, sometimes Brown can be spelled like this. Okay, so if you're actually like saying like a Chris Brown hurt somebody or something, or maybe use another one. Tom, let's see, Davies. Sometimes the people actually will spell the last name. They'll think it's actually Davis. Okay, well maybe you're right that Tom Davies murdered somebody in town, right? But the name was actually Tom Davis. Okay, so there's actually a Tom Davies in town, and suddenly everybody thinks Tom Davies is a murderer. So you want to make sure that everybody is right. Everybody gets that name correct. Otherwise, everybody's going to think that Tom Davies is a murderer. You want to make sure that the correct person is there. So you got to make sure that's one thing. You always got to make sure you got correct is that the name is spelled correct. Okay, correctly. So, all right. So that is all I have today. I know that was a bit longer than last week. Thank you very much. And as I said, your new assignment is going to be posted by the time I post this. And then again, that will be due in a week. Okay, it'll be due September 19th. Okay, that'll be a profile on somebody. It could be anybody. It can be like your mother, your father, your brother, sister, a friend, worker, coworker, whatever. I don't care. All right. I strongly suggest people actually, if you really want to get an idea, like actually, if you want to, you can like run it by me ahead of time and if you want an idea if you're heading in the right track. Okay. All right. So anyway, that's it. And again, please submit on a Microsoft Word doc. Thanks very much, everybody, and I'll be talking to you.